Hi, I'm jaymewoj, and this is Civil Discourse. And today we are discussing feminism and the fight for women's rights. Would you ladies like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Selena Vidya. I do a lot of things. I'm a business owner, so I own a digital marketing consultancy that's based with SEO. I'm also an actor, and I host a podcast called Permissionless.
Hi, I'm Poonam Basu. I am also an actor. I do get my hands in a lot of pies out here, but feminism is something that's obviously a very big part of my life, being a woman in today's day and age. So I'm very excited to be a part of this panel today.
Yay! Now, I said this was going to be a conversation, not really an interview, but I'm going to start off with kind of an interview question to start. Kind of vague, just what is feminism to you? Because I think that word has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people today.
I'll start. So feminism is an interesting word. I'm very averse to even saying the word feminism because it has such a bad stigma attached to it. I think when people think of feminism, they think of flag-wearing women or men-hating women, And I think feminism, it's not even about women being equal to men. It's just about women being the best that they can be and not having obstacles in the way and being able to perform at their highest point in life without hitting roadblocks from within companies, hitting roadblocks from politicians, hitting roadblocks from men, even hitting roadblocks from women. And I think that's a long-winded answer to what I think of feminism.
Yeah. Feminism is definitely a very loaded and complicated term nowadays. I think at its core, it's really about respecting women as, functioning, important part of society. And I think that's one thing that most feminists across the board can agree on, but there are definitely different branches and different ideologies that have emerged over the history of feminism over the last, few decades or so.
Well, you both kind of commented on, when we were talking beforehand, on feminist linguistics. And with, I guess, the term, do you think that it's a term that, since for a lot of people it does have a negative stigma, which obviously came from the opposition that created it, that it's a word that we should really focus on creating a positive stigma around, or is it a word that we should relatively ignore and go for just focus on, I guess, the movement as opposed to it being labeled by a word, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think I'm really big on thinking about whether we perpetuate the problem by the way that we talk about things. And I think feminism is one of those words where it's been used negatively and basically as, poison towards women for so long, even though it shouldn't have been, that I think removing the word altogether and just focusing on the movement itself and, improving where we need to improve and pushing for rights is important. I think we shouldn't even tie a word to it, and we shouldn't feel like a word should label what we're doing at all.
But if we don't have a label, if we don't have something to rally behind and organize ourselves, what do we call ourselves? What are we doing then? How do we even communicate to everyone what our goals are and what we're trying to accomplish if we don't have a term?
Yeah, I think
term. It's a term that's that more general term. What is it?
Yeah, I think it's a weird. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking out loud, but I think just focusing on, women's rights and equality alone, to me, could be a substitute for that. That's a good question, though. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's hard because you even look at the way terms move as stigmas make them negative, and then people adopt new terms, and then those stigmas just kind of follow. Because you think of that with liberals calling themselves progressives, and they started calling themselves progressives because of the word liberal having such a negative connotation, and now all those things that were associated with liberal are now slowly being moved on to this. So I think it's a delicate balance, because it is, you don't want to be defined by the word feminist and have to focus so much on constantly defending what it means, but you also don't want to lose kind of that the identity factor of it being that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, maybe just generally focusing on just equality, which is something that's very difficult to adulterate in terms of meaning. I mean, how can you ever say that equality is not a good thing? You know, only a terrible person would say, no, equality is terrible. You know?
Yeah.
So perhaps that is one avenue that would make things a little bit more, you know, just take out that negativity, the bad associations, bad connotations, and just kind of focus on the heart of the movement. But I mean, in terms of like, I totally understand what you're saying, Selena, 100%. I hear you. And I've heard definitely what people have said to people who, you know, are come out as strong feminists and things like that. So I definitely know what you're talking about. But I guess for me, and perhaps it's because I've never encountered it myself personally, but I'm still like totally down with the term. Like, I think to me, it's still has very, very positive connotations. And I'm proud to say that I'm a feminist, and I love that Justin Trudeau says that he's a feminist. And, you know, like, I think maybe that's like a piece of it, is if we can get, you know, the quote unquote other side to start taking it over and start using it as more mainstream, maybe that's another way of, I don't know, battling that negativity, is just
infusing it with positivity.
Yeah, just kind of see if we can get everybody to get on board with the positive side of things.
So Lively Debate commented, and I think this is based on something Poonam said. So they're asking, so what exactly is the core of feminism? I think you were talking about the core issues, or you made some comment about the core. Do you want to elaborate?
I mean, the feminist movement usually is traced back to the late 1800s. And so I think back then it really started with a lot of like marriage and property owning rights, if I'm not mistaken. And then from there it quickly like suffrage, depending on what part of the world that you were living in. So really, I think it's the core of feminism is just striving for that equal foothold in society, whether it be in terms of property ownership or marriage or political rights. It's just kind of striving for equality on whatever platform and place you want to be equal in or believe yourself to be equal in.
So what do you both think are because I think as movements, because the feminist movement and women's rights movement, whatever you want to call it, has been around for so long and has had some major successes and then is having some pushback now. What do you think are the major issues? Because I think it gets more, as you get the big victories of being able to vote and own property, like these big things, the fight, it gets harder as the things get more complicated and more, I guess, subtle and smaller things, because it's harder for people don't see them as clearly, especially if they're like men or people, women who are born of privilege and then don't see what women of non-privilege have to deal with, or the other way around. It's just, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think, and I'm going to go into kind of a company standpoint, because that's where I've experienced a lot of inequality and competition and things that are going against the grain of what somebody who believes in feminism is trying to do and improve upon. And I think a lot of it has to do with, again, the language around not necessarily feminism, but even the language around what we're trying to do. So if you look at people trying to help women learn how to define themselves in the workplace, a lot of it focuses on what we may be doing wrong inherently just by nature of us being women and how we're softer spoken and how we're this and we're more gentle. And then you have, you know, people saying, well, maybe if women, you know, were stronger and they put a stronger foot forward, they would, you know, they would have more leverage. But then on the other hand, you have the other side saying, well, if a woman is strong like this, she says this and it comes off one way, but a man will say this in a company and it comes off another way. And I think that just how we even, it's almost like we're dancing around the subject of what the core of the problem is and how we need to fix it by averting our attention with all these things like, well, why don't you try speaking differently? Why don't you try doing this differently? But we're not actually fixing the problem, which is the inequality.
Right. I mean, I actually read an article about that very, very issue. It's very funny that you brought that up. It's from a feminist linguist in, I think it was Berkeley, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember her full name. I think her last name was Lakoff. But she was talking about this very issue about how there's this urging for women to, like, you know, be stronger, you know, not be afraid to interrupt, stop apologizing, which is a more traditional manly way of speaking. But then we give up the whole, you know, like, well, why can't we just respect women for talking the way women talk? And I think that's really the key right there. So you totally nailed it on the head. I think it's a lot of movement lately in terms of like trying to gain equality and everything has been on us and women changing who women are, instead of on the other side accepting women as they are, as equals. And I don't know, for me that was a really big like turning point. For me, I was like, oh, like, you know, all these things that I do, like when I talk to someone and I explain something to them, I always check in and I wait and I make sure they understand. Those are considered weak ways of explaining things to people. But after I read this article, I was like, that's not weak. That's actually very strong. I communicate very well with people because I check in with them. I make sure they understood what I just said. That's not weak at all. It's actually kind of weaker to just trample over people. So so I'm kind of proud of that. And I think if we can kind of get that out there and make women feel proud of the way they are instead of ashamed, I think that would be a better, more powerful advantage and a more powerful strategy.
Yeah, and I think oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask a general question. So if you were going to comment on that, I'll let you go ahead before I derail us in another direction.
Okay, this is just a quick thing because I see it. It's very interesting because I see 100% this within the movement. And I think we saw a lot of it with the Democratic side of the primaries and talking about feminism, because there were a lot of debate over who feminists should follow, Bernie or Hillary. And it seemed like there was this divide within, I think by a generation divide, in that the younger generation seems to think exactly how you guys are thinking, that it's not about being as good as the boys or being better than the boys. It's we want to do it our way and we just want equal opportunity our way. Where I think the older generation, and I think Hillary Clinton is a good example of this, is very much about how do I beat the boys? And that's kind of the mindset that there was. And I think it's because there were different generations and there were different battles during those times, but that's a very interesting thing you're saying.
Yeah, and okay. So let me try to
or you can comment either way.
Well, you actually just brought up something that kind of piggybacks or maybe somewhat ties into what I was saying. But so if we set, you know, what men achieve or their pay or whatever that may be, if we set that as the bar and we're trying to equate ourselves to that level, do you feel like the younger generation, as we raise them, if we're exposing them to what we view as our disadvantages as women, which may or may not be a disadvantage, it depends on what we're looking at, do you feel like we're perpetuating the cycle in almost planting the seed in the younger generation to think that they inherently have that disadvantage? Or do you think if we didn't expose them as much to it, they would grow and be able to be on equal ground without even necessarily having to deal with that issue.
I mean, did you want to go, or did you want?
Go.
Okay, so my thought is that I think it's complicated, because what ends up happening is, what should happen is, with any movement that's multi-generational and has been around for a long time, is you need moments of what happens is, once you have what I think should happen is, once you have a success or you break through one barrier, you really have to analyze and engage your critical thinking to see where the movement is at and how it's changed, and how now opportunity and the people, the next generation, has changed. Because I think what you see is that I don't think either the generation is wrong. It was just that women in an older generation had different disadvantages. So they felt like, and this is a mass generalization, they had to respond a certain way to succeed, for the movement to succeed. And I think now that they've achieved a lot of things and a lot of things have changed, now it's just natural that the younger generation will respond differently. But I think the important part is the analyzing it. So what's, I think, the wrong part, and we saw it in that, we saw it a little bit in the Hillary campaign, was the older generation telling the younger generation how they should feel, as opposed to it being a conversation of understanding of what you have different opportunities than I had growing up. Where is your privilege and why do you feel these ways? And then actually finding a way to move the movements forward. I think that answers your question.
It does. Yes.
Okay. Did you want to comment, Poonam?
I think I went on too many tangents and I lost track of your original question, Selena. I'm sorry. What was your
so do you feel like with the younger generation, if we expose them to what we view as a disadvantage or inequality, are we perpetuating the cycle and exposing them to something they wouldn't otherwise experience by pushing our experiences on them?
Yeah, I think I pretty much agree with Jamie.
Yeah.
I think.
Oh, go ahead.
It's constantly moving and changing, and the times are constantly moving and changing. So everybody's going to have different, I don't know, like an entire generation, like you said, can have a completely different reaction to something because that's not the world that they were born into. So I don't know, I guess it's just important to just keep an open mind and be able to roll with the punches, right? So,
yeah.
I
think
know.
it's also a big I think this touches on a problem that is just in our culture in general, and we see it in politics, we see it in all these social movements, is that people are obsessed with trying to tell people how to think based on their experience, instead of encouraging people and teaching them how to think instead of what to think. And I think that's the line. You don't want to tell the younger generation or the older generation, you should think this way. You should encourage them. And my opinion is you present the facts and then encourage them to critically make a decision on their own. And then they can do what's best for them. I think that's
very similar to how a lot of people are approaching religion in terms of child rearing nowadays.
Yeah, and there's there's an audience question too. They said, you made an assertion that I wanted to question you on. You mentioned that the way of communicating, of check-in and making sure someone understands you is perceived as weak. Where does that notion receive its justification? In other words, on what basis do you think that men view that type of communication as weak? I think that was from before.
Yeah. I guess it's, maybe I could do an example. So if I were like, okay, Jamie, like, let me tell you about what you're supposed to do with the paperwork when I'm done with it, okay? So just follow me with this. So first you're gonna take all of the papers and you're gonna staple them in series of 10, okay? And then you're gonna put them in separate different piles, and then each pile is gonna go into a color-coded folder. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So then once you finish that, we're going to take the folders into the conference room and we'll distribute them, and I'll let you know what time we're going to do that. Okay, sounds good?
Sounds good.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the reason why people would say that was like weak is because I didn't just tell you what to do. Like I treated you like an equal, even though I'm your boss telling you what your assignment is. And I walked you through it, made sure you understood, and I personally don't agree with that. I think that that's a very strong, polite, civil, good human being type of way of talking to another human being. So I don't agree with that, but I've definitely heard and read in various journals and articles, and I wish I could give you a specific quote, but I can't, that a stronger way of doing that exact thing would just be to say, take these, put it in the packets, put them in the folders, get them ready by 7 o'clock.
Yeah. But I also don't think it's interesting because the comment then was, but I don't this person doesn't perceive that as weak. Just like I don't think any of us would perceive that as weak. I think the difference is I think it's the sexism, depending on who you're talking to. Because yes, if a man did that, I don't think anyone perceived them as weak. And I think a lot of people would, quote unquote, perceive a woman as weak just because they don't like a woman being superior to them and telling them what to do in any way. So I actually don't think in a lot of cases it has anything to do with being weak or any of that. I think that's all an excuse to not want the equality.
Yeah, no, you could absolutely be right. I mean, honestly, I don't know anybody in my generation or younger that has any kind of problem with the way women talk. Like, kind of like what you were touching on before about like the older generation and their perception and their battle and like what they had to do for their battle of equality. I think because men were born to those children, I mean, to those women, excuse me, they were automatically like able to receive women in a totally different way. And so for us, I don't know, for us, it's just different. It's completely different. I mean, I still think there are people who probably fall into the more sexist side of things, but it's so far less, at least here in the United States. I mean, that's a whole nother issue, is globally speaking, you know, feminism varies drastically in terms of success, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
So then, I just feel then, how do you feel? This is kind of taking, I think, a shift into the rape culture epidemic, and how you feel that is changing. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Because I think we're also seeing this with the Black Lives Matter movement in a way, in that there's an argument against, I think a big difference between like the civil rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement is people who were denying civil rights, they were claiming they weren't racist, but the whole basis of what they wanted to do was racist. Where now I think the whole thing with police brutality, it's that there's obviously a lot of people who are absolutely racist, but I think there's a huge population of people who think, well, I don't see it, so then it doesn't exist. And I think that's kind of where it's easier when it's going back to what I was saying for women's rights, when it's like, I don't have the right to vote, I want to vote. As opposed to it being, well, now there's all this really subtle sexism in the workforce and all these things that kind of create rape culture and all these other things. How do you tackle them when they're so small? And they're more subconscious things than the conscious things that you can actually point to and be like, see, you're doing it.
Right. I mean, I think all of that, I mean, first of all, I think it's wonderful and a testament to all of our women in the past that have fought so hard for everything, that we are even at this point where it's so much more subtle. Like we're on a very like subliminal, subconscious level of like, let's change the way people think and feel kind of a thing. And that's amazing. It's amazing that that's where our fight is right now. And yes, it's incredibly nuanced. So, but I think people need to just kind of take a chill pill a little bit sometimes and kind of be like, you know, a lot of the things that people believe that seem to be opposing, they can both be true at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that, I don't know, people kind of get stuck in like, no, I'm right, you're wrong. But this is not a black and white issue. This is a gray issue for sure. Like very, very gray, like the grayest ever. So I think people just kind of need to take a deep breath, be like, all right, this is where it is. Like, we all know what we want. You know, we were aiming for equality. And okay, I respect what you're saying. You know, there's the, what do they call it? Lipstick feminism, the ones who believe like wearing makeup and like dressing up and fashion and everything and owning like women's sexuality is, you know, powerful. Well, I don't think that necessarily goes against like Riot Girl kind of feminism. I mean, if that's how you want to do it, great. If that's how she wants to do it, great. As long as she feels empowered, right? It's about how you feel. Like, do you feel empowered? Do you feel like you're making a difference? You feel like going out there, showing your confidence, your pride in being a woman, is that working? Like, is that how you want to do your women's rights side of things? Then great, do it. Why not? I'm not going to stop you.
Yeah, and what's interesting about what you were saying, and also the rape culture side of things, I think a lot of it comes down to education. We're at a very interesting point where a lot of it's refining and refining and refining, and there isn't anything where there needs to be a huge push like voting. That was a massive undertaking. This is more like just fixing things here and there and making sure everyone's understanding both sides and what's going on. But there is a woman, her name is Alexis Jones. And what I like about her is she's very, very much, she fights for women's rights, but she does so by educating and talking with men. But she does it in a way where she doesn't come in and say that the women are always right, because sometimes the women aren't right. It's more about understanding both sides and saying, you know, especially rape culture is such a touchy thing, but in a situation where that happens, instead of victim shaming and saying the woman is wrong, she did this and she did that, or saying the man is wrong, in some instances, of course, absolutely no contest, it was the man's fault. But there's situations where it could be just an overlap of miscommunication and a lot of things that we don't need to create such a huge divide. We just need to educate, and that's going to help on the feminist side incredibly.
So,
Totally.
Lively Debate commented, but I don't think we live in a rape culture. Do you think we actually do?
Yes.
Thoughts?
I definitely believe we live in a rape culture. I mean, just the fact that women from a very, very young age are programmed to think about what they wear and how it will affect the way other people think and what other people's behavior is totally messed up. Like, if I want to wear a skimpy little skirt because it makes me feel awesome, but I can't because that sicko over there is going to want to rape me. Like, that's fucked up. I'm sorry, excuse me. That's not right. Like, it really makes me angry, but I think that's a huge side of rape culture. Like, I don't know if men realize how much we have to think about that kind of stuff. Like, I have to wear my clothes based on where I'm gonna be. Like, is it gonna be dark and isolated? Then I better bring a coat. You know, like, I need to cover up. Like, that's terrible. I'm endangerment because of the way I dress, because my body is some type of, I don't know, it could elicit negative reaction from somebody. Like, that's ridiculous, first of all. Like, really? Like, just looking at something is gonna make you want to take advantage in that way? Like, I would say that's something wrong with you, not with me. But that's not how it is. Society would say something's wrong with me.
Yeah, and I agree with, I mean, the fact that a woman has to think twice about whether she's actually safe, no matter where she is. Like, even so in Los Angeles, when I'm walking somewhere that kind of looks a little sketchy, I shouldn't have to feel scared. I shouldn't have to keep my phone in my hand. I shouldn't have to worry that, I'm going to be taken advantage of, or that my purse might get grabbed because I'm little. I'm a very little person. I always joke about how I'm pocket kidnap size, but that's a very real fear when I'm walking alone because I'm small, I'm female, there's rape culture. And some people just don't have morals. You don't know if a man is going to do something to you. And it's truly scary to have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just reading some of the comments. I think it's getting a little sexist, so I'm going to ignore them. But because they commented with, there's been an 85% drop in rape since the 1970s, even though the definition of what constitutes rape has expanded during that same time frame. And then something kind of weirder. I would have to look at that because one, I would like to say a few things. One is rape culture isn't new. It's been around forever. I think just now it's in the focus because the women's movement has had its successes that have allowed it to now focus on this. And I think it's more than just about the actual act of rape. I think rape culture is about the over and sexualization of women. And I think you see that, like, I'm in the entertainment industry and you see it with everything. And men are sexualized as well, but they're not just sexualized. There's the whole range of ways we see men. And in the entertainment industry, you really only see women in a sexual way. Even if they're not presented in a sexual way, it's still kind of in a sexual way because it's kind of all through the lens of, well, I wouldn't want to have sex with that woman because of this. And it's to me, then that reinforces women to be like, well, I don't want to be that way because something's wrong with that. So I think it's this huge psychological thing, and it's in our media, it's in our advertising, it's in everything.
Totally. Totally agree. And I mean, in terms of the casting process and everything, I mean, right now, like sexism and like the inequality in terms of income for actors and actresses and stuff like that is like a really hot item thing right now. I mean, it's been around forever, but it's like really, really hot right now. And so I'm constantly getting updates about it. And yeah, I mean, just looking at breakdowns for female actors and male actors, like it's like male actor breakdowns are so interesting, and it's all about like the person and who they are. And then female ones, like even if you're like the quirky best friend, it's like, but she's still sexy. She's got like cute brown hair,
big boobs or something. They're terrible.
And
I comment on that a ton.
What? Like what is this? But I mean, I still love it, and I'm here, and this is what I want to do. But I mean, and there's been changes. I mean, Ghostbusters just came out. That's amazing, right? I'm so proud of that. I'm so happy for that, and I really think that there is progress being made, and we still definitely have further to go, but I'm happy that we're moving. So that's good.
So the next comment
was,
for sure. But a culture implies that it is so common as to be the view of the majority. I don't know if I agree with that, because I think that implies that unless the majority of people are raping, and the majority of men are raping women, that it's not a culture. And I think it's a complex thing, because I think the over-sexualization of women within the culture is 100% true. But at the same time, most men are taught not to rape women. So then I think what ends up happening is then there's this friction between the two ideas. So it doesn't, and then most people with education don't raping women, but they help lead to the viewpoints that women are just sexual beings to be used by men, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Also, just to add to that, I totally agree with everything you just said. I think part of the rape culture is also like the fear that women have, like the fear that we're talking to, like when we don't know, like, you know, what's safe to wear or where, who's going to be where, is that we're scared of being raped. I mean, yeah, kidnapped, murdered, robbed, all of that too, but rape, you know? And so I think that's why I think it's still probably safe and normal to call it rape culture, because that is the fear.
Well, and again, I would like to, with that statistic that was thrown out about it declining, I'd like to look at that to see exactly what that means. Is that just including people who are prosecuted for rape? Because that's very different than the actual rape rate. And I also don't know how that's changed, if it's less or more people that are actually being prosecuted in proportion to how many people are accused and all that. But I have a feeling there's probably more to that statistic than is at the surface.
And it also,
yeah, and there's,
okay.
No, I was just going to say there's the underbelly of, you know, you have the whole slew of what isn't even reported or made notice of at all. I don't, when it comes to statistics having to do with rape, I don't really think that there's any way to say it's declined, because you can't really account for the black hole of what's going on that isn't even brought to the surface, you know?
Well, and I think the whole, if that statistic is that rape has declined, to me, what that means is that the feminist movement has slowly been successful. You know, like you can't just say, well, it's declined, so now it's not a problem. Right. Well, yeah, so we succeeded, but we still have to keep going.
We've worked towards it, and now we need to continue to work towards it. Yeah, I think the other thing to think about with that is, you know, perhaps the statistics say that it's become less of an issue here, maybe in the United States, or perhaps even in the Western world in general. But, you know, globally speaking, on a worldwide scale, we still have a lot of things to get over. I mean, I was just reading something the other day about I think she was Syrian, a Syrian woman who was gang raped, and then she made it over to Germany without her family, because her whole family disowned her basically, and they were like, "You dishonored us," and blah blah blah, because she was gang raped in Syria. And then she knew, like, even when she was there, she knew that her family was going to come kill her eventually, an honor killing. And they did. They freaking went all the way to Germany to murder this poor little 20-year-old girl because she was gang raped. Like, what? And it's so close to home. It's freaking, it's Germany.
Yeah.
Like, I can't believe that that's still in our world. It's 2016, and this is still a thing. Yeah. Like,
and I think they touch on some of these comments touch on another issue that we were talking at the beginning about the linguistics of things, because people are saying, well, that's sexist culture, not rape culture. And it's like, yeah, we can debate on the terminology for each one, but at the end of the day, that's just distracting from the fact that there is a problem. If it's like, if we're going to fight about the words, let's just get rid of the words and talk about what the actual issues are, because it's not helping the situation, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that just has to do with people's tendencies to want to argue and debate things, but they're actually afraid of making changes and having movement in anything. They would just rather talk about, well, this is that and this is that, because it's easier than actually fixing the problem and addressing the issue.
Mm-hmm. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is abortion and kind of the political struggle surrounding abortion. That there was the huge victory, and then there was struggle, but it was clear that the women's movement won. And now there's this kind of backlash and real strong surge of trying to push back those rights.
Yes, this is something I've definitely struggled with watching this whole phenomenon happen. I just can't understand it. I guess just personally, this is all very personal. This is not in terms of like facts and everything, but it's like for me, growing up pro-choice, I've always believed in a woman's right to choose because it makes sense to me. I believe I'm pro-choice with everything. Like, you know, if you want to marry a man or a woman, you do you, babe. Like, I don't care. Same thing with having an abortion. Like, it's your body. Like, you do what you think is gonna be best. And and the funny thing is, I think the thing that I always want to talk to someone who's pro-life about is like, who do you think are the women that get abortions? They're the ones that know that they can't provide a good life for the baby for whatever reason. Sometimes it's because they have an abusive husband and they know that the child is going to be abused. So they're like, no. Sometimes they know they don't have enough money to give the child a good life. These are all good reasons to not bring a life into this world. Like life is so much more than just biological life.
Mm-hmm.
And I just never understood that. And then the other thing is, to me, because I'm pro-choice, pro-life falls under pro-choice because you can choose whatever you want. So if you're a pro-life woman, that's totally fine. You know, you do whatever you want. You do whatever you think is right. If that's what you think is right, great, do it. Don't have an abortion. But if that woman, that desperate woman over there needs to have an abortion, don't stand in her way. Why?
Yeah, and I mean, the problem with that too is that if you do take away the right to do that, women are going to do what they need to do. And by not providing them a safe way to do that, you're just creating a very bad situation. You're making them make choices they don't want to make. And it even comes down, you know, situations where in areas where if you are raped and you end up getting pregnant, you know, you should by law keep, like, you can't have an abortion. And I think, number one, that blows my mind, because why, if somebody's put in that situation, not willingly would you force them to have a child? Again, like Poonam was saying, bring it in the world, know that, one, the whole stigma around how this baby was even conceived, two, not even having the ability to take care of them, three, maybe being forced to have that person in the child's life because they were technically the father. Like, all of these things, I don't understand how you can force a woman to have a baby. Like, you just should not force anybody to make, that is a huge life-changing decision. It changes everything. And to take away a woman's right to choose is
my other issue with it is that
no.
I 100%, I'm pro-choice, but I 100% understand where the pro-life side is coming from. I just think they're misguided in that their focus is on just making it illegal. Because one, all the statistics, our history shows that when you do that, it's not going to stop it. It's just going to make it riskier. Thing is, if you actually wanted to if it was actually about preventing abortions because you believed in the life of the child, I would think your focus would be on doing things that make it so women don't feel like they need an abortion. So you're actually for equal pay and for childcare services and these government assistance for women so that they can get off their feet and take care of a family. Because, I mean, you're always going to have people who abuse the system. So you can never use that as an excuse to hurt all the people who need the system. But it's like you're not helping. Your choice is, I want to be an empirical partisan view of it's just bad without helping the situation or saying, how can I help women not need the abortion? Because if you make abortion legal, you haven't actually helped women in any way.
Yep. And I mean, women's health being under attack right now, it goes even beyond just abortion, right? I mean, there are so many, like, there's the whole thing with contraception and its availability, and insurance companies sometimes blocking, you know, access to birth control.
Continue to talk on this, because I think they meant it as a a sarcastic comment, but they said, contraception, dude, I think, to my response. And then that would be my response to them is that, well, not everyone has access to contraception. So if you actually believe that, you should be fighting for everyone to have access to contraception.
Yep, absolutely. And like, you know, to your point, that's not something that pro-life people do. They're against that too. So it's like, okay, you're against contraception, you're against abortion, you're against sex education. Like, you don't even want to teach about how to do this safely. Like, what? How are you planning to achieve your goal here? Like,
Yeah, you actually, the sex education thing, you know, I wanted to touch on that because I feel like not providing that to younger children, you know, taking the mindset of, oh, well, if we just don't expose it to them, then they'll never, you know, think twice about this and they'll remain abstinent. And I think the more education you can give somebody and the more that you give them the ability to make a choice and understand what they're doing, the better choices that they're going to make and the less dangerous situations they're going to end up being in. So I think even from a young age, we just need to stop being afraid of letting people understand what is natural to people and what, you know, they're going to be dealing with as they get older.
absolutely.
Instead of stigmatizing
100%.
it.
And if you look at the data, like if you follow the countries and the societies that, you know, have a strong sex education system versus abstinence only education, you'll see the efficacy of either one. Like it's night and day. Like, it's insane how effective sex education actually is.
Yeah.
But for some reason, data and numbers don't matter either to these people. I don't know how to get through
and
to them.
I think the difference is that one, in a broad stroke, sex education tends to be about fact, and abstinence education is less fact-based and more partisan in that they're only displaying the portion of the information that supports their claim. And if you, my thing with this is I always felt that if abstinence was, if you think that that's the best way, it's like, okay, so educate on the full spectrum and then say the best way to do this is through abstinence, but there's all these other ways to prevent this stuff from happening. I think you would reach, I mean, I don't think there's no evidence, there's no statistics, it's actually the opposite in all the statistics, that sex education equals more sex, which I think is a lot of the pro-life conservative fear. Is it?
I think so. I mean, it's kind of, that's actually something else that has the same thing that I was talking about with abortion, where it's like, I feel like the abstinence education falls under sex education.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense why they like want to make it a separate thing. Like, you can, under pro-life, you can still choose, I mean, pro-choice, you can still choose to be pro-life. Under sex education, you can still choose abstinence only. That's fine.
Yeah.
Just know about everything else. Or if other people decide to do something else, that's awesome. Respect it. Respect their choice.
Yeah, and I think we kind of answered this question already, but maybe we should dive in a little deeper. Lively Debate says, I don't agree with the argument, but from the perspective, the fetus is a life in the same way an adult is a life. It doesn't stop us from making laws against murder. Now, I don't agree with that concept, but I think we need to understand the arguments on both sides. I mean, I agree with that completely, because if you don't understand where people are coming from, then you can't find the solution. But I would go back to what I said previously, is that if you're actually, both sides should be fighting for the same thing. They should be fighting for reducing women needing abortions. I think that's the epidemic we're in, is that there will always be the exception of women who make a stupid mistake and then do that. But that's not what it's about. It's about actually wanting to make it so women don't need abortions. That's my point of view. And both sides should want that, I would think.
Definitely. The other thing I would say in response to the comment would be, it also depends on how you define murder from the other side, right? Because sometimes if you go to war, that's considered murder to some. You're going and you're killing, and if you have a baby and you're have to carry it to term, and then that baby goes and is sent off to war and kills a whole ton of other babies, like, kind of seems like a horrible little cycle going on there. So how do you guys define murder in terms of war then? And children and 18-year-old little boys and girls going off killing people. Do those lives not matter? Do those lives, they don't count as adult life?
Jeremy, we kind of talked about this, but I think he brings up a good point. Jeremy Hart says, there's also an issue with making sure sex educators are presenting actual facts. I was taught abstinence only in school, but the educators frequently gave wrong statistics. I believe this is a fear tactic, but I think having actual facts is more likely to prevent unwanted pregnancies. We've already commented on that, but I guess, how do you combat, I guess, from a more activist approach, or for the movement, how do you think the movement best combats wrong information or deliberate attempts to mislead the public with wrong information?
I don't know how effective this would be, because like anything, you put it in the hands of another person and they can manipulate it if they want to. However, I think much like in politics, having a third-party fact-checking system that schools can refer to, where somebody can actually go and get third-party information that isn't tied directly to what the school is giving you and educating you on, could maybe help mitigate the problem. But then somebody has to make sure that that third party is also presenting the correct facts, which leads to, it's kind of like a rabbit hole, but that could be an option.
Any thoughts?
I don't really have.
Yeah. I don't either. That's why
definitely
I asked.
Sorry, I just had a thought, taking us back to abortion and sex education. And I think, so we're talking a lot about pro-choice and how under pro-choice there's also pro-life. And I think there's kind of a gray area, if that makes sense, where a woman may be pro-life and she wants to bring a baby into the world, but there's also a stigma attached to adoption. And what does it mean if a woman gives her baby up for adoption? Does that mean that she's a terrible person? Does that mean that she's unfit? And I think touching on that area as well, and helping people understand that if somebody wants to have a baby but wants to provide them a better life and they are pro-life, they don't want to have an abortion, then how can we help people understand adoption can be a better situation if it's done in the right way, and the woman is not at fault for necessarily making that choice either.
Poonam, do we still have you?
Sorry, my lights went off in my conference room.
Oh.
Just give me 1 second.
I'm going to read some comments. Let's see. This is a good one. Pine Creek asks, do you agree that many feminists are hesitant to push back against religion, especially minority religions that restrict the rights of women? Did you hear that, Poonam? Do you want me to repeat?
Yes, if you don't mind, sorry.
Okay. Pine Creek asks, do you agree that many feminists are hesitant to push back against religion, especially minority religions that restrict the right of women?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I think feminists have tackled a lot of issues that come along with religion. I mean, I know the feminist movements in the Middle East, for example. I mean, that's something they tackle every day. And from the inception of the feminist movement, a lot of like what we were talking about before, like rights under marriage, property rights, and things like that. I mean, a lot of those came from things that kind of originated in religion. So I think feminists taking on religion is actually pretty common. It's probably, I don't know, it's kind of almost part and parcel of what we do.
Yeah, I think, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think, no, I was going to say, I think they are. It's a much bigger battle because anything based in religion, I feel like takes a boatload more effort and care because you're not only going after women's rights and trying to make moves there, but you also have to deal with the underlying religion and how you approach that and what they view as right and wrong, and kind of insert yourself in a way that is understood where they don't feel attacked religion wise, because I feel like
and I think that's why that's probably where this question comes from, is that I think movements, I think in politics, politicians in general have an easier time kind of broad stroking things. And when movements are focused on a cause, they're really hesitant to broad stroke because it tends to hurt the cause, isn't that it turns people away, or it then focuses on something that the cause isn't about. So I don't think that I see where the question came from, because it's not like the feminist movement is calling out a religion. But I also don't think it would help to call out a religion, because it's normally not the entire religion that's the problem. And when you do that, then you're just opening a floodgate of resistance from everyone, including people who would support your cause, as opposed to actually going after the factions that are sexist or are mutilating women or murdering women or those kind of things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Lively Debate had mentioned, but I think they push back against the problems. I haven't seen them go after the validity of religion itself, but if religion is the problem and so on. I don't know, like, yes, religion can contribute to the problem just in their beliefs and their systems. However, we have to look at people in general and understand that somebody could be born into a family that doesn't necessarily have any kind of religion, but because of culture and media and society, they still have negative views towards women. And that's how they're going to raise their little boy, for instance. And that may not even stem from religion. So I think we have to look at the bigger picture, being mindful that religion, it definitely contributes in some way, shape, or form. But the bigger problem is just society and culture and how people are being raised,
and then
no matter what religion
says,
they are.
but in some cases, it is not just the participants of the religion. In some cases, is the theology of the religion itself. And I think it's a hard.
I mean,
go ahead.
I was just gonna say it's kind of it's a dangerous line to toe there, because religion is so often misinterpreted or interpreted the way people want it to be interpreted. So there are plenty of feminists who use the Quran, for example, to support their beliefs, whereas a lot of people would say that the Quran and Islam is not very good to women. But these feminists say that no, it's not in the book. The book does not say any of these things that the men say. So,
and I mean everyone on both sides, I mean, of any religion, they pick and choose what they follow. Because you would say, even in Christianity, on, I guess, the progressive side and the conservative side of the religion, they pick and choose what they follow and what they believe. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think religion is more of it's just a tool that people use however they want to use it. And you 100%, if they're using it to suppress people and to hurt people, they need, those people using it that way need to be called out. But to then try to ban the religion or make it seem like anyone who's using it in any way is also to blame, it's overly aggressive in my opinion, and it doesn't help the cause you're fighting for.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big fan of religion in general. I think someone was talking about religion authoritarian. I mean, yeah, I kind of would agree with that to a certain extent, but I don't think it's right to I don't think it's right for them to dictate what we do and say, and I don't think it's right for us to dictate what they do and say. And if they find peace and solace or whatever from those things, then power to them. Yeah. Just don't trample on other people's rights. That's where I'm going to come in and be angry.
Yeah, and to me, at the end of the day, it's more of a people problem than a religious problem, because even if you got rid of all the religions, people would just find something else as a tool to do what they're doing, because they just use it as an excuse to hate and to do those things. They don't, or they're conditioned by people who have chosen that through generations. So I think it's a very complicated situation, obviously.
Definitely.
Do you want to? Yeah, I mean, I think they said, Pine Creek says female genital mutilation is practiced in 30 countries, almost entirely for religious reasons. And I think the feminist movement does a really great job of calling those places out and trying to affect change there. And they've been successful in many cases. I mean, it's still a huge battle, but yeah, I think at the end of the day, I don't think that the movement is scared to call out religion when they need to.
No.
So, Selena, I don't know if we talked about it, but when we were talking earlier, you want to talk about how women represent themselves as they seek equality. We kind of touched on it a little, but I didn't know if you wanted to go more in depth.
No, I think we touched on it a good bit. So basically, you know, how you present yourself and how you go after issues. So this kind of goes back to when we're talking about the word feminism and how, you know, there's a bucket who may be classified as overly aggressive and very negative towards men. And then there are feminists who are fighting for actual equality, you know, allowing women to excel the way they need to excel without roadblocks. And I think just how we go after these causes and how we choose to work with men or other women or whatever that may be is extremely important, because when it comes down to it, as much as we're fighting for something, we're also representing ourselves. And if people start kind of feeling negativity and pushback from us in a way that isn't productive, because we're not representing ourselves, you know, we're representing out of anger versus logic or versus wanting to make change, then that doesn't really help the cause at all. So I think just being mindful and not being attackative is very important.
Yeah. So the last thing I'd like to discuss is, I guess, what you feel the role of men within the movement is. How, yeah, I think that's the simplest way of putting it.
I mean, I think you want to
go ahead.
I mean, I think we mentioned this before, but I really feel like the young men of today, like in my generation, younger, like around this Gen X, millennial kind of age group, I think the men overall in a big, you know, group have done a wonderful job of supporting us. A lot of the issues that we're battling, like we talked about earlier, is like very small, subliminal. It's in the language, it's in the culture, and like those are going to take a little more time to break. But now people are aware enough that when it usually, often, but not always, when you bring something to someone's attention, they're more receptive to being like, oh, I see what you're saying. And I think that's a huge, huge thing. So as long as we can continue to cultivate that kind of open-mindedness in men, so we can kind of be like, look, I don't know if you realize this is what's happening, but it's what's happening. They usually go, oh wow. Like the income inequality is a perfect example. So many men are completely on board with that. Like they're like, that doesn't make sense. Why do you guys get paid 70 cents to the dollar? That doesn't make any sense. And it's, you know, unless we bring it to their attention, they're not going to know. So once they know, we just need to get them on the bandwagon, and they do it pretty naturally nowadays. So I guess that would be it. Just keep an open mind and be ready to jump on board.
Awesome.
Yeah, and that's along the lines of what I was going to say. Just generally being supportive and understanding the past of, you know, what it's taken to get us where we are, and just supporting where we want to go. And I also think a big part of it, and I don't want this to come off the wrong way, but I think by men, you know, for example, in the workplace, just because that's been my experience with a lot of this, is, you know, if you're stepping up and you're being respectful and you're working peer-to-peer and equally with another woman, I don't think it's necessary to call that out. And I've seen that called out before, because then you're kind of drawing attention to the fact of, hey, I did this thing and now, you know, I'm supporting women. Just do it. Just ingrain it in what you're doing, be supportive, and that's it.
Awesome.
The other thing I would mention really fast, it's actually something my best friend told me about way back in college, and he was in this sci-fi class, and they were sitting around debating something, and then all of a sudden the professor was like, "You guys are all assholes," and they were like, "What?" They're like, "Do you realize that the men in this class have been completely dominating the conversation, and like none of the ladies have even gotten a chance to speak." And that's kind of a weird one, because it is in, like, when you're being raised as a girl, often you are told to like sit back and wait. You know, you're not always told to jump in, interrupt, you know, get yourself out there. You raise your hand, you wait politely. And while we're transitioning into a more equal place, it's important for men to realize that we have that battle and to give us the space to talk. And he was amazing about this, because after that class, it really changed his perspective. And so, I mean, for me, I know, like, he gave me a lot of opportunity when I was scared to put myself out there. He gave me an open platform to speak my mind, and it gave me a lot of confidence. And now, as you can see, I speak my mind all the time. So I think that's another thing to keep in mind, is just the struggles sometimes that we might have, and let us, like, give us that space, open it up.
Awesome. And I just want to read two things that I liked here. Blue Streak Sai says, equality is empowering for women and men, which I agree with completely. And Jeremy Hart says, don't talk about it, be about it, which I love. Would either of you like to give any parting words of wisdom, encouragement, anything?
Usually when I start saying parting words of wisdom, I ramble, so I'm just going to not this time. So I want to extend this by like 20 minutes and we go off the rails.
I guess I would just say that we're all human beings. That's it. We're all human beings trying to be the best human beings that we can possibly be. So, you know, give yourself the credit for doing that, and give others credit for doing that.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
Oh,
go ahead. Go.
This is more focused towards women. And I was going to mention it earlier, but as far as women with women, there's a lot of competition that already goes on between women and men and women's rights. Don't be an unsupportive asshole to other women. If you're a woman, support her, because she's dealing with a lot of things that you're dealing with. And if we start having a divide with women, it's not going to help the problem. So support each other. That is it.
I love that. I say that with everybody in general. It should be more about encouragement and collaboration over competition, because it's just positive that way instead of negative. Well, thank you so much for both of you being here. I'm here every Monday at 7 Pacific time. Next week, we are discussing the future of the LGBTQ movement and the fight for equal rights there. So join me. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.